You believe you grasp time. You check your watch. You sense yourself aging. You recall yesterday and anticipate tomorrow. Time appears self-evident. It feels like the most fundamental aspect of existence. But that isn't tea time. That is merely perception, a neurological illusion your mind constructs for you. Most people carry around this romantic notion in their consciousness. Time is a river. You picture it flowing, carrying you forward from what was, through what is, and toward what will be. You believe it moves. But here is what is wrong with that elegant metaphor. If time is a river, at what rate does this river flow? 1 second per second. That is circular nonsense. That is equivalent to declaring a chair is 1 chair tall. It reveals absolutely nothing about the fabric of reality. The actual nature is far stranger, far more mechanical, and frankly far less poetic than any flowing current. Time doesn't flow. Time doesn't propel you forward. And if you believe you comprehend how time operates simply because you can mentally count seconds, you are about to face a profound shock. Let us begin with what occurs inside your mind, because that is where the misunderstanding originates. You assume your internal chronometer is a dependable tool. It is not. It is a chaotic jumble of conversion mechanisms. Take a straightforward test attempt to count to 60 seconds mentally. Just sit and count 1, 2, 3. You think you are measuring time. But what you are actually doing is executing a highly specific, highly individual algorithm. Some of you, when counting, hear an internal voice. You are literally talking to yourself, silently articulating 1, 2, 3. If someone disrupts you and requests you speak aloud, you lose your place. The system crashes. But others, and this is where it becomes fascinating, hear no voice whatsoever. They visualize images. They might see a measuring tape with digits scrolling past like a news ticker. Click, click, click. If you employ that visual measurement system, you can actually scan a newspaper or review a shopping list. While counting time, you can organize your laundry, examine fabric patterns, and still maintain that mental ticker running flawlessly. But the person counting with an internal voice cannot read a single word without losing their temporal tracking. This reveals something essential. What you perceive as time as passage is simply a cognitive construction, a pattern recognition exercise your brain performs. It differs dramatically between individuals. It is not a universal law. It is a biological mirage. So when discussing physics, when examining the cosmos, we must discard your subjective experience. We must stop discussing how it feels and start examining what it fundamentally is. In physics, we must be operational. That means we don't ask, what is time? Essence, because that is a question for philosophers who enjoy endless debates. We ask, how do we quantify it? And the answer is almost disappointingly straightforward. Time is simply a method for sequencing events. That is all. It is an organizational framework. Imagine you possess a deck of cards. You arrange them in sequence. You can state the jack precedes the queen and the king follows the queen. The cards aren't moving. The surface isn't flowing. The sequence is merely a structural characteristic of how the cards are positioned. Time is the surface. Events are the cards. When we say time passes, we are simply reading the cards sequentially. This leads us to the most significant error everyone commits. You think time is a vessel. You envision the universe as a vast empty container, and time is a clock mounted on that container's wall ticking continuously, even if the container is vacant. You think that if we eliminated all the stars, all the worlds, all the particles, and all the radiation, time would continue ticking. Tick, 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 wrong. This is the Newtonian perspective, and it is obsolete. Time is not a background framework. Time is a measurement of transformation. If absolutely nothing in the cosmos changes, no particles oscillate, no radiation travels, no energy fluctuates, then time halts. It becomes meaningless. You cannot define a second without a physical mechanism to mark it. A swinging pendulum, an oscillating quartz crystal, a vibrating cesium atom. Time is not independent from the contents of the universe. Time is a characteristic of the contents. This is where your instinct resists. You say, certainly, but surely time affects things. Time makes me age. Time causes food to decay. No, it doesn't. This is a linguistic deception. Time is not an actor. Time has no agency. It doesn't reach into your refrigerator and spoil your food. Microorganisms do that. Chemical processes do that. Entropy does that. Time is merely the accounting system we employ to monitor the velocity at which those processes occur. Claiming time did, it is like claiming centimeters constructed the building. Centimeters didn't construct anything. Builders did. Centimeters simply indicate where the structures are. Time is the measuring instrument, not the constructor. Let's extend this measurement analogy further, because this is where reality becomes genuinely bizarre. If time is simply a ruler we use to gauge the interval between events, what occurs if the ruler itself is elastic? This isn't speculative fiction. This is observable reality. We previously assumed that a second was a second throughout the cosmos. If you possessed a clock on Earth and a clock on Mars, they would tick in perfect synchronization. It seems obvious, it seems correct, and it is entirely incorrect. The velocity at which clocks tick depends on their location and their motion. This is not a mechanical defect of the clock. It is an intrinsic property of existence. Imagine you are operating a vehicle across an enormous flat surface. You can drive north or you can drive east. If you drive purely north, you are achieving maximum advancement in the northward direction. But if you rotate the steering mechanism and begin driving northeast, you are dividing your velocity. You are traveling somewhat north and somewhat east. You aren't progressing north as rapidly as before because you redirected some of that motion eastward. Now substitute north with time and east with space. This is the core of relativity. You are perpetually moving through the cosmos at a constant velocity, but that motion is distributed between space and time. If you remain perfectly stationary in your seat, you are dedicating all your motion to advancing through time. You are journeying into the future at maximum velocity, 1 second per second. But the instant you stand and walk or board a spacecraft and accelerate, you are redirecting some of that motion into space. You are traversing space, which means you mathematically must advance slower through time. Your clock decelerates. Your aging decelerates. You aren't damaging the mechanism. You are simply altering direction on the coordinate system. If you could travel at light speed, which is the ultimate velocity constraint of the cosmos, you would be utilizing 100% of your motion for space. You would possess zero motion remaining for time. For a photon of radiation, time does not elapse. It is generated and absorbed in the identical instant from its own reference frame. The cosmos is static. Now you might be considering, well, I don't sense my timepiece decelerating when I sprint for transportation. Naturally not. You are too slow. You are a biological creature moving at negligible speeds. The effects are minuscule at human velocities, but they genuine. We must program satellites with this mathematics. GPS satellites are traveling rapidly, so their time differs from your time. We literally must calibrate their clocks. If we didn't, your GPS would be inaccurate by kilometers within hours. There is another dimension of time that deceives us, and it returns to that counting challenge, the concept of pattern recognition. We perceive time as possessing a direction, an arrow. Past is determined, future is undetermined. You can recall breakfast, but you cannot recall dinner. Why? If physics equations function forwards and backwards, and most do, why can we recall the future? If you record a planet orbiting a star and reverse it, it appears perfectly normal. It obeys all gravitational laws. But if you record an egg dropping on the surface and shattering and then reverse it, everyone recognizes it is fabricated. The yellow interior doesn't leap from the surface, reconstruct itself into a sphere and seal itself within a shell. Here is the truth. This isn't about time itself. It is about probability. It is about disorder. It is vastly, vastly easier to shatter an egg than to construct one. There are countless ways for an egg to be shattered, dispersed here, splattered there, shell in 3 fragments, shell in 1,000 fragments. But there is only one precise configuration where the egg is intact. So as objects move and interact, they naturally transition from the organized state, limited options, to the disorganized state, numerous options. We call this entropy, and this is the sole reason you perceive an arrow of time. You are observing the cosmos, shuffle the deck of cards. You began with a perfectly ordered deck, and every second that elapses is simply the cosmos shuffling it somewhat more. You cannot reverse the shuffle simply by wishing. This means that your sensation of time flowing is actually just your brain registering the escalation of disorder in the cosmos. You are a disorder sensor when you distinguish the past from the future. You are really just distinguishing less chaotic from more chaotic. If the cosmos were in a state of maximum disorder, maximum entropy, where everything was uniformly distributed and nothing significant was occurring, your brain wouldn't be capable of distinguishing the past from the future. There would be no egg to shatter. There would be no memory to create. In a thermally balanced cosmos, the arrow of time disappears. So let us return to those individuals counting mentally, the ones visualizing the measuring tape versus the ones hearing the voice. They read both attempting to impose a rigid linear framework on a cosmos that is actually far more flexible. We construct these cognitive models, these counting mechanisms, because we need to survive. We need to know when danger approaches or when resources are available. We evolved to monitor duration, but we did not evolve to comprehend the dimension of time. Our brains are efficient, not precise. We concentrate on the present because that is where we exist. But in physics, the present is a highly elusive concept. If you and I are positioned adjacent to each other, our present is effectively identical. But if you are on a world 1,000,000 light years distant and you begin moving away from me, your definition of the present slices through the cosmos at a different angle than mine. What you consider to be occurring right now might be in my future. What I consider right now might be in your past. There is no universal present that encompasses the entire cosmos like a covering. The cosmos is a block of events, a 4-dimensional structure, and how you slice that structure depends on your velocity. This is difficult to comprehend. It feels incorrect. It feels like I am informing you that up is down. But that is because you are attempting to translate the sophisticated language of the cosmos into the primitive language of your biology. You are attempting to count objects when you should be measuring radiation. When you attempt to force the cosmos to conform to your intuition, you generate confusion. You generate paradoxes. But when you release what you think time is, when you stop attempting to count it like a collection of objects and start measuring it like a dimension of space, suddenly the mathematics functions. Suddenly the cosmos becomes comprehensible. We are not finished because even if we accept that time is a dimension and that it expands and contracts with velocity, there is a far deeper question lurking beneath the surface. We discussed measuring time and we discussed the arrow of disorder, but we haven't discussed the origin. If time is a measurement of transformation, what occurs when you reverse the sequence completely to the initial frame? If the cosmos is expanding and we reverse it, it becomes smaller and smaller, hotter and hotter. Eventually, you reach a point where the laws of physics themselves begin to dissolve. You see, all our clocks, our particles, our worlds, our radiation, they exist within the cosmos. But if the cosmos itself was generated in a moment we call the Big Bang, does it make sense to inquire what occurred before that? This is the ultimate test of your revised definition of time. If time is simply a method for sequencing events within the cosmos, then inquiring what occurred before the cosmos might be as nonsensical as inquiring what is north of the North Pole. It sounds like a legitimate question grammatically, but geometrically, it is meaningless. There is no north of the North Pole. There may be no time before time originated. and yet we still possess that persistent feeling, that internal counter, that voice counting 1, 2, 3. We desperately desire the cosmos, to possess a prehistory. We desire a timeline that extends backward infinitely. It is difficult to accept that the measuring tape might simply commence, that the counting mechanism had an activation point. This creates a tension between our psychology and our cosmology. We are finite entities attempting to comprehend the infinite using instruments constructed of biological matter and electrical impulses. It is remarkable we comprehend anything whatsoever. Consider the patterns again. The person who visualizes the measuring tape mentally can count while reading because they're reutilizing different circuits. Visual versus verbal. Physics is identical. Classical mechanics was the verbal counting. It functioned for everyday situations. Relativity is the visual measuring tape. It enables us to process complex patterns that the previous method could manage. We're constantly upgrading our cognitive software to match the hardware of reality, and the upgrade process is painful. It requires discarding concepts we cherish, like the river of time. But here is the remarkable part. Even though your intuition is incorrect, even though your internal clock is a biological adaptation, and even though time is a flexible, relative, malleable dimension rather than a strict metronome, it still functions for you. You can still prepare an egg. You can still meet someone for coffee at 2 p.m. The strangeness of relativity is concealed beneath the surface. You don't need to comprehend the combustion mechanism to operate the vehicle. And you don't need to comprehend space, time geometry to live your existence. But isn't it superior to know? Isn't it superior to know that the mechanism exists? This returns us to that peculiar experiment with the counting. Remember the distinction between the person who hears numbers and the person who visualizes them. This is not simply a curiosity. It reveals a profound gap in how we comprehend the cosmos. When two individuals communicate with each other about something complex, like time or relativity or emotion, they think they're re-speaking the identical language. They acknowledge. They concur. They say, I comprehend. But what is actually occurring? You are executing a massive invisible translation process. You take the words I articulate and convert them into your private internal imagery, which might be completely different from mine. I say 1 minute, and I visualize a clock face. You hear a voice articulating 60 seconds. We arrive at the identical answer, so we think we agree. But the machinery within is totally alien. This matters for physics because it exposes the fragility of common sense. Common sense is simply the accumulation of assumptions you acquired by age 18. It is constructed on your specific internal imagery. If your cognitive image of time is a tape with numbers on it, you else struggle to comprehend how time can bend. If your cognitive image is a voice counting, you else struggle to comprehend how time can be spatial. When we attempt to teach you about the quantum vacuum or the curvature of space-time, we aren't simply providing you new information. We requesting you to delete your operating system. We requesting you to discard the measuring tape and silence the voice. And that is why it feels so difficult. That is why your brain rejects it. You aren't simply learning, you are translating against the structure of your own biology.